Hello, alright, you're listening to the Gritty Bowman, home of gritty bow hunting films, interviews, tall tales, and a wee bit of manly boasting.
I'm South Cox, and you're listening to The Gritty Bowman.
In this episode of Gritty Bowman, we continue our discussion with South Cox, bowyer and owner of Stalker Stickbows and spot and stock mule deer hunting genius. This podcast has 3 parts, and this is part 2.
If you like this show, please go to our website at grittybowman.com and subscribe to this podcast and tell your mates and pals about us. Do us a favour and please take a moment to leave us a rating or a review on iTunes or on our YouTube channel. Send your questions and podcast ideas to grittybowman@gmail.com. If you're listening to this on iTunes, you can see the video version of this podcast on our website at www.grittybowman.com.
When I watch films that you're in or some other hunters that are hunting spot and stock mule deer, usually, a lot of times when I'm looking at it from the camera's angle, it looks like the deer can see you.
Oh, yeah.
It looks like there's no topography there. It's just flat, and then you're just walking up to it. Right. You know, it's like what? Yep. And then if you look real careful, you can go, oh well, that deer can't actually see south. Right. There's a hump there, but barely. You can, like with binoculars and stuff. I would, if you're up there on the hill from the camera's angle, trying to decide your approach. I mean, have you developed the skill then to see topography that other people miss?
Definitely. And I think, I've probably also missed opportunities because I either didn't study it long enough or I just didn't see it. But I can't count the number of times when I've seen a buck, looked at a situation, and initially my first impression was, no, it ain't happening. Maybe another day that buck will be bedded in a different position or something like that. But the classic example is the second hunt on my Stalkers in the Backcountry DVD, where I'm hunting in Nevada and I sneak up and I shoot at that buck and miss him at point blank range. Beautiful big 4-point, and it looks like I'm walking up on either a retarded buck or one that is drugged, or somebody already shot or something like that, and because the camera angle is slightly higher than I am, and even then, taking that into account, it's still.
How does this buck not see him?
Yeah, yep, exactly. And what it is that there's a slight roll in the hill with a little bit of a rock slide in there.
You even narrate that when you're doing the film.
Yeah. Yep, and it was funny, Guy Eastman used that segment in a seminar before he had talked to me about it and found out what was going on, and I don't think he had picked up on that fact, and he's like, it looks like, people on the audience were like, what? Why is that buck not seeing him? Yeah. And then I was able to, you can see.
Shot, you fish it through, it looked like some terrain.
Right. Yeah, you can see as I'm approaching this buck, I'm hunched over, and at one point I kind of stretch my back like this because I had to stay low in order to keep his antlers, just the tips of them visible above that rock slide. And then once I got, immediately before that rock slide, it dipped down just a tiny bit. So then I was able to get up on the rock slide, and then you can see me when I go for the shot. When the buck finally stands up, I still have to come up in order to be able to clear the top of those rocks, to get my shot.
And the stuff that you're clearing is that micro topography.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, looking for that little bit of topography is really what makes, such a huge difference in getting those stalks. And then also, keeping track of where other animals are that bed down. And because a lot of times, with mule deer, most of the time, that was a perfect situation. It was a buck all by himself. When I started that stalk, there was a few does that were bedded above him, but then they got up and went off down the hill below.
Your heart when you are after this one, and then off to your right, you get busted, and they all blow out. Right. It breaks your heart.
Yeah, and that's another thing when you're stalking. You have a tendency to get tunnel vision and only, you're focused so intently on that deer because you're trying to monitor what that deer's doing and pick your next step or your next few steps without stepping on something, that's going to break and make noise or what have you. And it's easy just to be completely focused on that animal and not paying attention to what's going on around you. Maybe there's another buck or another deer that's bedded down, that you didn't see before, and you end up stumbling into that deer, or another one that comes in, and while you're stalking, that if you were to have spotted that deer, sat down, let this other deer come in, bed down, then you'd be back in business again.
Well, you said you was going to talk about the glassing. Is that the part you're talking about, the glassing?
Wait, I have another question first.
Well, that's how you're going to see that of the deer, though, right?
What I was going to talk to you about glassing was more about setting up to glass initially to find the animals. But yes, that is a good point, though, is to continue to look. Yeah.
What I was going to ask is, are there any rules of thumb when you're stalking in like that? After you've got the micro topography figured out, you've selected an area with that. When you're actually stalking a buck, is there anything like you decide? They're kind of like your rules of what you won't do. Like, I'm not going to do this, or I don't stalk this way, or if it's, I'm going to wait till later for that buck to move because this isn't stalkable.
Right. So pretty much what I do once I've spotted a deer, I like to come in from directly above if possible, or if not directly above, from an angle, but still above. Usually, and not all the time, but a lot of the time, a deer will bed down, they'll be facing downhill. And when the day warms up, typically the thermals will be carrying uphill. So, coming in from below them when the thermals are blowing uphill is, you can see the result of that right away. Coming in from above, you have the
wind's in your favor.
Yep, you have the effect of gravity kind of helping you out, where you're able to kind of just slowly slide down if you need to be like on all fours or on your butt or whatever. It's a lot easier to slide down. You're able to stay lower and keep a lower profile, when the animal's below you and you have vegetation that's growing up like this, you can slip down through it a lot easier than trying to climb up through it.
Right. Okay.
So it seems like it's easier for an animal to spot you when they're lower than when you're up above them. So I much prefer to stalk from above. I also prefer to wait till the animal beds down than stalking when they're feeding. And there's other people that feel strongly the other direction, that when they're bedded down, then they're not distracted by feeding and what have you. But particularly when I'm shooting a stick bow, I want that animal stationary because I've chosen my route, and a lot of times that might be the only way that I can get to that deer. And if I'm stalking a feeding buck and I've picked my route and it takes me 20 minutes to get down into range, that buck could move 100 yards, or even if he moves 10 yards, it might blow the opportunity for me. So I really like to stalk them in their beds. And mule deer typically will either bed with something at their back, say up against a rock, or maybe they'll bed like where a tree, on a steep slope where a tree grows up, and then they'll bed right at the base of the tree. So you pretty much just have to pop up, and then you get a shot right into their bed. Or if they're bedded at the base of a rock, then you're either going to pop over the top of the rock, and you're going to have a shot distance that's measured in feet rather than yards. Or you get up, you sit on top of that rock, and then you're waiting for them to stand up and then move around, and then you're able to get a shot off the top of the rock like that.
Yeah, that's cool. That's
great advice.
Yeah.
So to back up just a little bit from that scenario and talking about glassing, one thing that I highly recommend is, for one, obviously buy the best glass that you can afford. And that doesn't mean if you're on a limited budget, that doesn't mean don't pay your rent so that you can afford to buy a pair of Swarovskis. There's a lot of good binoculars out there that are significantly less than Swarovski that you're going to get 90 to 95% of the performance of Swarovskis, and you don't necessarily need to pay that extra $1,000 or $500 to get that extra 5 or 10%, be realistic, and don't just buy the name brand. But if you can afford it, by all means, spend that extra money, because that little bit could make that difference between seeing that animal and filling your tag on a 10-day hunt or going home empty-handed. Then once you have your binoculars, don't just walk up to a ridge, lift your binoculars up and look like this and be wobbling and the wind's blowing and what have you. Yeah. At minimum, sit down like this, brace your elbows on your knees, and glass like this. You're going to be a lot steadier, making kind of essentially a tripod kind of a hold. Better yet, and by far better yet, is to actually mount your tripods on a binocular, mount your binoculars on a tripod, and then sit in glass with using that.
I read an article that you wrote, I don't know, a ways back, where you had said you spent years where you didn't use a
tripod. Mm-hmm.
You were trying to keep light, and you were carrying your stuff in, and so you went in and you ran into a guy that had it, and you were like, and then and since then you just really haven't gone back to hunting without a tripod.
Yeah, it's that was an eye-opening experience for me, and just to kind of make a real short version of that, or to retell that story in a quick manner, I bumped into a guy in Colorado, and I was hunting with a friend of mine, and super nice guy. We hit it off. We're talking. Normally, I don't like running into people in the backcountry, because then the next thing you know, they go back and they tell their buddy, "Oh, I ran into South Cox up on this mountain," and pretty soon there's 100 guys in there, right? And so I usually, if I see somebody, not that I'm antisocial, I'm just trying to, kind of not be seen. So I bump into this guy, and we end up visiting on the side of the mountain for, I don't know, an hour or something like that. He and his dad were back there, and his kid. And so a couple days later, we bump into him again, and we're both headed for the same head of this canyon. And so we sat down and we're talking, and he gets out his 12 by 50 Swarovskis and puts them on a tripod. And it's like one of those deals where that it's whoever spots the buck, it's their first crack, right? So I sit down, and I'm stoked because he's setting up his tripod, and it's going to take him a few minutes. I know that. So I'm looking and picking out all the obvious spots where the deer, where I know that deer would be. Right. And so I'm, glassing like this off my knees, and I don't see anything. So I'm, kind of now looking in the secondary areas where this, maybe bucks will be, but it's a little less likely. So he sits down methodically. He's with his tripod. Oh, got one. And there's nothing worse than hearing somebody. The only thing worse than hearing that, when your hunting partner says it, that's one thing, because it's like, cool, game on, your partner. Well, when somebody else outside of your hunting partner says that, it's like, great, now you're not even in the game, right? Right. So I was like, where's he at? Not that I'm going to take this opportunity from this guy, but he's looking in an area I just looked at, and I didn't see him. So he's right there at the base of that cliff, that ribbon cliff. So I'm looking again, and it's like I look across the whole base of the ribbon cliffs, and my male pride and ego starts to kick, and it's like, I don't want to admit that I can't see this buck that he's picking out, and he's counting points on, and I can't even find the stinking buck. So after a minute or two, it's like, where at along the base of those ribbon cliffs? And then he points it out specifically, and finally it's like, oh yeah, okay, I can see a deer there. But the wind's buffeting me, and I'm shivering, and I'm moving like this, And so I'm like, let me take a look through your binoculars. And I take a look through his binoculars, and there, the big screen TV is the buck clear as daylight. I mean, it wouldn't have taken a whole lot of glassing skill for somebody to pick him up using that setup versus me shaking, cold, shivering, on my knees with the wind blowing, and that was the eye opener right there.
I got a question though. There's Swarovskis. Those are the ones that are real expensive. Like, was it those or the tripod?
So I had a pair of 10 by 42 Swarovski ELs, and he had a pair of 12 by 50 Swarovski ELs. So there was a difference in power in the lens magnification and 8 millimeters in the objective lens, which does make a difference. Right. But I believe that had I had my 10 power on a tripod, then it would have made the difference. However, I did buy, I got myself a pair of those 12 by 50s as well. I was gonna ask you, did you buy a pair? Because at first it's like, oh, well, it must be the binoculars. And then, you know, but in the back of my head is like, no, it's the tripod. And, right. You know, yes, it's the binoculars also, but it's definitely the tripod. And since then, I've started hunting with the 12 by 50s just because I'm glassing typically, you know, long distances for mule deer, and that extra 2 power does make a difference. Right. And I really like that setup.
Tripods nowadays aren't that heavy, right? You can get
some pretty lightweight tripods, yeah.
Do you also bring a spotting scope? Yes. Even with the 12 by 50s?
Yep. Yeah, if you're gonna hunt mule deer and you're at all concerned about antler size or points or like that, then you absolutely have to have a tripod. Yeah. But to a lesser degree, if you're gonna hunt mule deer and you want to tell whether it's a buck or a doe, you still need I'm sorry, I said a tripod. You still need a spotting scope. Right. And you still, I mean, you're glassing sometimes across a canyon, it might be 3/4 of a mile away, and you are looking at a body of an animal, but you're not able to tell if it's a buck or a doe. Right. And you may go, man, that's a big bodied deer, especially next to the one next to it, but is that a doe and a fawn? Right. Or is that a buck and a doe? Or is that a mature buck and a yearling buck?
But with the spotting scope, you don't have to walk down there a ways to find out is what.
Something, I glassed up some bucks. I mean, here's a classic example of why you want to have high quality optics. 2 or 3 years ago, I can't remember exactly how long ago it was, we were hunting the same spot we've been hunting in Colorado for a number of years, and we're sitting at the head of this canyon. We had blown out this area, and so we're kind of working hard to find an animal to hunt. And I set my spotting scope up, and way down the canyon, there's another face on a hill. And it's, you know, prime glassing time, and I get out my spotting scope, and I'm just kind of, you know, at this point looking anywhere to try to find an animal. And I pick up an animal down there, or looks like a few deer, and I mean, I'm straining my eyes to try to see that it's like, man, okay, those are definitely deer. And then, you know, the animal picks his head up, and it's like, I think I see a frame of antlers. And if I can see something like that at that distance, and I pulled out my topo map and I counted grids, it was 4 1/3 miles away that I had picked up this bachelor group of bucks. And my buddy's got better eyesight than I do. He got out his spotting scope and looks, he's like, dude, those are definitely bucks, and there's some nice ones in there. And he went down and got on those deer the next day, because it was so, I mean, it wasn't just 4 1/3 miles. That was by the way the crow flies. Right. So it was probably 8 or 10 miles for him to the circuitous route that he had to go to get down there. And it was a full day, you know, for him to get down there, and then back at dark, you know, by the time that he went down there, blew the opportunity, sadly to say. Oh. He had a groundhog pick him off, and then he was so mad. But that discovery with those optics opened up a whole new hunting area down there, and so now we've added that to our stomping grounds, and it, you know, regularly produced good deer down there now. Okay. Another thing I wanted to touch on glassing is don't just glass from one perspective. It's pretty easy. You know, you get up on top of a ridge, you sit down, you glass, you look over your bowl or basin or ridge line or whatever, and it's like, okay, there's no deer here. Now let's get up and move and go to a different area. What you need to do is if this is, let's say, your ridge line here, and you're glassing out finger ridges that come off like this, you need to be going down this, not only this main ridge line and glassing down, but then you need to be really, to be doing this effectively, you need to be walking out these finger ridges, glassing down off the sides, going all the way to the end of that finger ridge, and then glassing off the end. A classic example of this is a buck I shot in, when was that? Probably 2007, I want to say. I had 2 tags in Nevada. I'd gotten a landowner tag, and I drew a tag for the state. So I could kill 2 bucks in Nevada, which is the coolest feeling ever, to go on a backcountry mule deer hunt and know that after I killed my buck, I still had the opportunity to shoot another one. Yeah. And so I killed a buck about, I don't know, day 3 into the hunt. And I had bumped into another guy that was hunting the area that actually now works for Kuyu, and had gotten his phone number. And it's actually kind of I didn't actually bump into him. I bumped into his hunting partner, found out he was, talked to another guy who coincidentally knew who he was. That guy gave me his cell phone number. That guy, the guy that was up there hunting, ended up after, I don't know, like 2 days, his hunting partner bailed out on him, and he had driven over with the guy, so he unfortunately had to leave. But he told me when I talked to him from on top of the mountains, like, dude, I saw this tremendous buck down at the head of this basin. And so I had exhausted this area that I was hunting in and need to go back for a reload on food. So I decided, well, I'm going to go down there and look and check out the head of this basin and see if I can find this deer. So where he told me this buck was, it was like this big bowl like this. And he said, dude, the buck was right down in that bowl. And so I got down in there and I glassed, I got in the head of that bowl and glassed down in there, and there was nothing there. And that evening, and then the next morning, I got up and I figured, okay, well, I'll give it, a couple hours. I'll glass this, and then I'm going to skedaddle if I don't see something. So I got up the next morning, glassed that bowl, still nothing. I mean, there was no bucks in there at all. And so in this bowl at the head of this ridge kind of came around like this, and then this formed a finger ridge here. The main ridge line went west from there. And I got to thinking, it's like there's a lot of country out on the end of that finger that is right there in relation to the bowl, that maybe those deer, maybe I'll go out on the end of this finger and then look over the end there. And it was a pretty good investment in effort, physical effort, for me to get out there to the end of this ridge, but it'll also expose a whole face that I wasn't able to see from where I was at over here. And so I dropped down into the bowl, hiked up over, got on the top of that ridge, and so I'm glassing nothing, so that I move further out the ridge and further out the ridge, and pretty soon I'm able to glass right down off the end, and I get out, boom, there's 3 bomber bucks. There was a buck that looked like Bullwinkle, looked like you'd taken a sledgehammer, hit him in the forehead, and his antlers went like this, and it was just a nice big 4x4. It was laid out. And then there was a giant 4x3 that was probably 27-inch, frame buck that, had he been a 4x4, would have been solid mid 180s, beautiful buck. And then there was a non-typical that I can't remember how many points he had. It was, I ended up killing that buck. And I don't remember how many he had, but I don't know, it was like a 7x9 or something like that. It was really the only one of 2 non-typical bucks I'd shot. But these 3 bucks ended up splitting up, and they all went and bedded in different spots. And that non-typical, it was funny though, I was sitting at being greedy, I'm sitting up at the top going, I want to shoot that one. No, I want to shoot that one. I want to shoot that one. So I can't decide. I mean, literally all 3 of these bucks are completely unique in their own way. One's like a typical 4x3, beautiful big frame buck. The other one's laid out, super wide. and the other one is a cool looking non-typical. So I'm going, oh man, if I got it, which one of these, when these guys bed down, which one am I going to shoot, right?
Yeah.
So then
I have that problem all the time.
Yeah. So finally I decided, okay, I'm going to shoot that non-typical. And then they had all kind of bedded down, but it's just a brief morning bed. And then they all got up at one point, and they all three peeled off in separate directions. And as luck would have it, the buck that I wanted to shoot came back into the bowl and then walked way up into the bowl and then bedded down. And so from where I was at, I had a kind of a wide open approach in the very beginning. Now we got the opportunity to learn a couple of lessons on this from this hunt here. One was, glassing from multiple locations, and then also spending that extra time and effort to walk out those finger ridges. Don't just, sit at the head of the bull and assume you've seen everything, but take the time. If you're walking out a main ridge, hunting a main ridge line, the temptation would be to stay on top and just keep glassing as you go. But you need to take the effort to walk out those finger ridges also and look down off of both sides. And as you're walking out those finger ridges, stop and look, maybe every 50 yards, or depending on how thick the cover is, maybe you need to stop and glass every 25 yards. But each time you're gaining a new perspective. So you're looking behind rocks, behind trees that you weren't able to see.
That's what I was going to ask you, because you said that they tend to bed in front of something, right?
Yeah.
So if you're up here looking and they're in front of something, you're not going to see it until you get down here and see it from that angle, is what you're saying.
Occasionally a mule deer will bed just in the wide open for no rhyme or reason, but typically speaking, they're going to be bedded up against an obstacle, whether it be, tucked up against a rock there so that they only have to worry about what's out in front of them here, or they're bedded, on a hillside like this. There's a tree growing out, and typically they'll bed right on the uphill side of the tree. And so usually there's some obstruction of some sort.
So that's why you say go to a different angle so you can see it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because maybe a deer is even up feeding, but they're behind a bush, or the lighting is poor and you can't see it from that angle. But then as you move along that ridge line, can continue to stop and glass from all these different perspectives. If there's something in there, you're eventually going to be able to see them if you're glassing diligently.
And then you may have a pick of 3 when you shoot them.
Yeah. And then, you luck like me, then you get, okay, which one of these giant deer am I going to shoot, right?
You're mine, right?
Yeah.
So South, how do you sneak in quiet?
What I do, first off, I'm a fan of lightweight boots, and for more than just the reason of them being quieter. If you take one of the more kind of mountaineering boots, they're very stiff-soled, and you're going to make a fair amount of noise if you're just walking down through, like, say, loose rocks and shale, versus even if you're trying to be quiet, it's harder to be quiet when you can't roll your foot and lift it more. When your ankle's locked up in that boot, then it's a lot harder to kind of move and be flexible with that. Also, the softer sole on a more flexible boot is less likely to break a twig if you step on it, versus a rigid, sole. You step on something, it's going to crunch a lot more. So I'm a proponent of lightweight boots, so that helps right there. Typically, though, I'm not, walking up on animals that are unaware of me, either intentionally or accidentally, but occasionally that does happen. And to increase the chance of, getting a shot at that animal, I feel more confident and comfortable hiking with lightweight boots. And to kind of stray a little bit off topic here, but continuing on the lightweight boot subject, climbing with, in rocky terrain, and like boulder hopping through boulder fields and stuff like that, I need to be able to step onto a rock, and it's not a flat face necessarily, it's off at an angle like this, and I need my foot to be able to roll to the side and be able to push off just the toe, and really it's almost like being a little bit more like barefoot rather than a stiff boot, and it's a lot more cumbersome.
Right, and a stiff boot, don't they make it so you can't roll?
Right, exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So, if you have ankle issues, then yeah, maybe you don't want to hunt with a lightweight boot. But for me, I'm hunting with like a just over, like a high top tennis shoe, that style, that height of a boot, and maybe not even a lot more structure to the boot than that. Like the Solomons I like. I like the Loa Zephyrs. There's another boot that I really, really like. It's the Anu Elk Hunter Mid. So
Hunter Mid. Yeah. I love the Loa Zephyr, but I can't find them that don't fall apart.
That's the one that we had the first time.
Yeah,
First time he took me out, he showed me the pair of these Loas he had. Yeah. He's had them for what, years, 6 years or something, and he was still wearing them. I'm like, okay, I'll pay the money for them.
I beat the crud out of them, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna buy like 2 or 3 more of these.
So we ordered a pair, and he got like 2 or 3.
And then
top of the mountain, one day.
Same day.
The leather on the stuff on the outside started falling off.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
they didn't pop in seams. They just the center of the leather popped.
I've had them pop in seams, and I mean, I'm hard on boots. I'll usually get maybe a season out of a set of boots, but I agree with you that there seems hopefully Lowe will figure it out and rectify the problem.
Yeah, with the place we got from took them back and we had to.
And I had heard that there was some production issues overseas with them, and so they just got some bad products.
A step up from the Loa Zephyrs in durability would be like the Renegades, the Loa Renegades, but these Anu Elk Hunter Elk Ridge mid height. I really, really like those boots. They're super comfortable. They're all leather, so they're maybe a little bit more durable than some of the other ones. They're a mixture of Cordura and leather. But any case, so kind of get back on topic. When I get to, it depends. Might be 75 yards on one deer. It might be 150 on another. It just depends on terrain. But I will take my boots off and put on a pair or 2 of thick socks. Really? And at that point, you go from crunch to, just super quiet, getting in on animals. And it makes all the difference. It takes that element of noise. I'm not worried. I mean, I'm still watching where I'm stepping, but half of it's because I'm not wanting to step on a sharp rock or a cactus.
Do you carry an extra pair of socks with you, or you just got 2 pairs on?
No, I carry. I actually have a thick pair of socks that I keep stuffed in the side pocket of one of my in my backpack. Yeah. So I go to I'll go to Walmart or whatever and just buy their thick logger socks or whatever, and then use those, and then typically they're either worn through on the bottom or filled with stickers or something. You end up just throwing them away at the end of the hunt. But it's just cheap ones. You get 3 for $10 or something like that. And
makes all the difference.
Oh man, yeah, what a difference.
The trick out, you let it out.
Everybody's
gonna be running around in socks now.
I've been doing that for years too. But the first time I went with Mark, we were hunting elk, and I show back up at the truck, and he's like, "Where are your boots?" I'm like,
"Well." The first time I heard it,
I was like, "They're way back there." I GPS their spot. I'll have to go get them tomorrow. So I'm walking out in my socks.
He took his bloody boots off. He runs off, and I'm just standing still.
But I did a lot of barefoot running and stuff. I like being kind of.
But then he's on the radio.
I'm a tenderfoot.
I'm running through 100 cow elk, and he's going in between them all.
Yeah.
So obviously it's quiet, right? He's going through all
They were
these cow elk
screaming,
trying to get
cool.
to these six bulls.
Yeah, that's worth mentioning is to, like you said, GPS your boots, or I'll put them up on top of a rock or something prominent. Or I'll take not better yet necessarily, but if I don't have the benefit of that, I'll take one of my blunts, one of my arrows out of my quiver, and I'll put my boots down. I'll stick one of my arrows inside my boot with the fletching pointed up, so that I can find it. And I've got pretty bright fletching, so because I've heard of people losing their boots and having to walk back to camp with no boots, and that would just be miserable.
Yeah, or to the trailhead. I mean, with a backpack on.
If you didn't get to shoot the deer too.
Well, that usually is what happens. If you have that kind of luck, you also have the luck where you don't shoot the deer.
All right, so we got attitude, terrain, mental toughness, glassing, micro topography, boots, stalking.
Smoking a bottle is another one that is hugely.
And not smoking a bottle, but
Right.
smoke in a bottle.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, the powdered wind detector. Yep. Yeah,
I got a beginner's question for you. I've used that stuff, the powder stuff, And so when I went to the store, I got to get some stuff. Well, there's all these different. Well, some have got some elk pee in them, and they've got this in them. That. Okay. Does that stuff make a difference? I mean, I know the powder stuff. It's brilliant because you go.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm good. Because and that's the thing I learned too. Is you walk 20 yards and it can change on you.
Yeah.
So you got to check it. But I was just wondering, that extra stuff they put in it, is it worth doing that?
Just talking specifically about scents put into this. I don't personally worry too much about that because I stink so bad by the time I'm up there on the mountain for a week that
Stalker smells like talcum powder instead of like elk urine. I'm not.
Well, like Cali heat, I've seen. Well, maybe I want to smell like that.
Right.
Maybe you don't. But
the only time that I think I would worry too much about like using scents is, say, if I was on a late season mule deer hunt or like that, and I was doing a scent drag to lay it down a scent trail, something to that effect. But aside from that, then I just whatever. I really do like that smoke in a bottle brand. Versus some of the other stuff's a little bit heavier. This stuff is like so light that you can you tap the bottle and just barely squeeze it with the bottle upright, and a little wisp smoke comes out like that.
Not chunks of powder that land on your hand.
Yeah, that go up and then straight down. But that I monitor. I've got 3 things in my pocket at all times when I'm hunting in the backcountry, and that's chapstick, because you get dehydrated, your lips get dry up there on the mountain, and a lens cloth, and for wiping my binoculars, keeping the lenses clean, and then a smoke in the bottle. And those are always in my front right pocket, so they're always immediately accessible.
Okay.
All right. Well, we have gone on a long time, so I wanted to talk to you about. We wanted to talk to you about some of the traditional bow stuff specifically. We kind of this mule deer stuff is really cool, but we also want to talk to you a little bit about some of the bows that you have and just some specific traditional bow stuff. But let's take a break, or and then we'll come back and we'll hit this one, this topic. So alrighty.
Brilliant.
All right, that's it for this episode of the Gritty Bowman podcast. I got a lot of information out of these 2 podcasts with South on how to kill a monster mule deer. In summary, South explained the need to have a positive attitude and mental toughness. Another key to his success is that South gets remote with a focus on wilderness areas. And South looks for hunting grounds with what he calls micro-topography. South likes to stalk from above his animal. This helps him with the wind, because deer bedded on hillsides tend to face downhill and therefore don't see you coming. South also finds it easier to sneak in on the animal from above when you need to stay low or crawl. Unlike some hunters, South likes to wait until the animal beds down before he stalks his deer. South recommends buying the best glass you can afford. South stressed the importance of mounting your binoculars to a tripod, and when glassing, don't just glass from the main ridgeline. Walk out the finger ridges that branch off the main ridge line and glass to the end of the finger ridge. South likes lightweight boots that have soft soles. He finds them quieter and they help him when hopping through a boulder field. He mentioned Solomon boots, the Loa Zephyr, Loa Renegade, and one of his favorites, the Anu Elk Ridge Mid. At 70 to 100 yards from his quarry, South sheds his boots and dons a thick pair of socks to silently close the distance. But he recommends marking the location of your boots somehow so you don't lose your boots. And South likes smoke in a bottle brand wind checker. South carries 3 things in his front right pocket: chapstick, lens cloth, and smoke in a bottle. I hope you enjoyed this podcast as much as I did. Be sure to check out our website for the show notes for this podcast, and please take a moment to leave us a rating or a review on iTunes or on our YouTube channel. And as always, be gritty.